Hey guys, today we're going to look at what happens when you multiply a number by -1. Let's go ahead and read this first part together. We have a times -1, which is what we're going to focus on, a being any number at all. So a times -1 is equal to, now notice, because of the commutative property of multiplication, we can actually go ahead and flip these two. So that goes over there and this goes over here, and that's equal to -1 times a. Again, the order in which you multiply numbers doesn't matter. And then, because 1 times anything is itself, that means 1 times a, right here, is equal to a. And we're left with -a. So therefore, we've just proven, by the way, it's because of the identity property of multiplication, 1 times anything is itself. So we've proven that a times -1 is equal to -a. Another way of looking at this is, let's just suppose we take the number 9 and we multiply it by -1. Then we would have 9 -1s added to each other, which is just, if you add a negative, it's the same as subtracting. So it's basically 9 -1s, right? Which gives you -9. So a real quick way of thinking about this is just take the 1 away and then put the negative in front of the number. And that's basically all you're doing. And that's why it works. And so that's kind of, if we look at the 9 times -1, that's actually kind of what we're doing. We're just taking the negative and scratching the 1 away and putting it behind the 9, and the same as it goes for any number. You just put the negative out front and you get -a. So that's what happens when you multiply a number by -1. You get the negative in that number. So let's go ahead and take a look at some examples. As you can see, this is a pretty straightforward lesson. We have 9 times -1. And we've basically just done that problem, right? So we get -9 back. This also works for fractions. 5/4 times -1 gives you -5/4. Again, it's just taking the negative, more or less, and moving it out in front of the number. And sometimes you can put it in parentheses, and if you put it in parentheses, you don't really need the multiplication sign. But anyways, if I take a number and multiply by -1 and get -1.7, what do you think the original number was? Original number must have been positive 1.7, right? Because we multiplied -1 and we got -1.7. Example 4. If I take 50, oh, by the way, this is a word you're going to see, a lot of you haven't seen it already, simplify. We're going to talk about in just a second what that means. 50 times -1. So what does the word simplify mean? Well, it means to basically make whatever you have shorter or simpler. Usually it means shorter. So if you have a bunch of numbers multiplied by each other, say 10, and you get a final answer, one number, that's a lot simpler than the 10 numbers you were multiplying. That's the same is true for two numbers as well. So going back, now if we want to simplify 50 times -1, we want to make it shorter and more simple, and so we'd just be -50. See how much shorter that is? A lot of times in math we just use that word for that reason. What's on the right is a lot shorter than what's on the left. Therefore we simplified it. So if we want to simplify 5 times -1, basically same concept, right? We're just tucking the negative back here and coming up with a lot shorter answer. How about pi times -1? Well, that's also pretty straightforward. It would just be -pi, right? Again, we're just taking the -1 and moving it up front, and 1 times anything is itself, and therefore the final answer is -pi. How about y times -1? Well, y is a lot like x. It can be any number at all. And so basically we treat it just like x, just like any number. You tuck the -1 behind it and you get -y. And you can also do this with two numbers multiplying by each other. Say m times n. Okay, it's pretty easy. All you're actually doing, and let's actually go ahead and look at a proof of this real quick. You're still just taking the -1 and moving it back to get this. And then 1 times anything is itself, so 1 times mn is mn. So you end up with -mn, which is exactly what goes in the box here. So the point of this example is the expression can be as complicated as it wants to be. It can be x squared plus y plus z times -1, and you just move the negative out front. Okay. This one's a little different. let's go ahead and look at this one together. We have a negative a times a negative 1. What do you guys think's going to go into that box? Well, again, you're actually just taking the negative and moving it up front. So now we have two negatives. Two negatives make a positive, and therefore the answer is just A. Therefore, what goes into this box is just A. If you ever wonder where two negatives make a positive, well, imagine taking someone's debt away. Debt is a negative, right? And if you take that away, so here's your negative. If you take that away, you have another negative in front of that. That's a positive. So that's why two negatives make a positive, because anytime you take somebody's debt away, that's definitely a positive thing, right? I'm going to go ahead and write this one out, because I just thought of it. What if you had 0 times negative 1? What would that be? Well, yes, you could take the negative. Let's do a different color here. Move it out front, right? So now you'd have a negative 0. But negative 0 is actually the same as positive 0 is the same as 0. Okay, you don't actually really need the negative here. So at the end of the day, 0 would actually still go in there, even though you could put negative 0. But again, it's all about simplification, and usually the problem's going to say simplify. So negative 0 isn't that simple. I mean, 0 doesn't have a positive or a negative to it. You could put it there, but it doesn't really mean much. So at the end of the day, you can just write 0. So that's it for this lesson. Again, it was titled Multiplying by a Negative Number, or Multiplying a Number by Negative 1, and you end up with negative A.